You know that person, the one who's aggressively wrong, the one who argues with the confidence of a brain surgeon, but the knowledge of a goldfish. The one who makes you sit there thinking, how are you this confident while being this wrong? You've argued with them. You've lost sleep over them. You've replayed conversations in your head thinking, if I just said this, they'd have to admit they're wrong. Here's what's terrifying. They weren't pretending. They genuinely believed they were right. Picture this, a dinner table, 7 people. One guy won't stop talking about economics. He's never taken an econ class, never read a book about it, but he saw a TikTok. Now he's explaining inflation to everyone like he's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. People are nodding, not because they agree, because they're tired. He looks around, proud of himself, genuinely thinks he's the smartest person in the room. That guy isn't stupid, he's trapped. And there's a psychological reason for that. A mechanism that's been operating for centuries. And once you see it, you'll never argue with an idiot the same way again. But here's the part that's going to make you uncomfortable. What if you're that person right now about something and you don't even know it? Everyone talks about the Dunning-Kruger effect. Stupid people don't know they're stupid. You've heard that 1,000 times. But 200 years before Dunning and Kruger proved it with science, a German philosopher named Arthur Schopenhauer watched it happening everywhere. Universities, social circles, positions of power. He saw mediocre minds speak with absolute authority. He saw ignorant people dismiss genius. He saw fools so confident in their stupidity they couldn't perceive how wrong they were. And he didn't just notice it, he documented why it happens. The exact psychological mechanism that makes idiots think they're intelligent. Here's the first clue. The less people know, the more confident they become. Intelligence creates doubt. Stupidity creates certainty. Here's the core mechanism. Intelligence requires the ability to see complexity, but seeing complexity requires knowledge. Which means if you're too ignorant to see complexity, everything looks simple. And if everything looks simple, you feel certain. Schopenhauer called this the fool's paradise, a state of blissful confidence created by complete ignorance of how much you don't know. Remember learning to drive? First time behind the wheel, you thought, this is easy. Gas, brake, steer. Then you actually tried. And suddenly, there's mirrors to check blind spots, other drivers doing unpredictable things, parallel parking. That moment when your hands gripped the wheel and you realized you had no idea what you were doing, that was intelligence waking up. That moment of realization is the beginning of actual intelligence, because now you can see the gap between where you are and where you need to be. But idiots never have that moment. They never progress far enough to see the complexity, so they stay in this looks easy mode forever. Schopenhauer watched this with philosophers who'd never studied deeply. They'd walk into lectures, sit in the back, and dismiss everything. This is just opinions, they'd whisper. Anyone could come up with this. They couldn't see the logical structures, the centuries of refined argument. To them, philosophy was just talking about life. So they felt qualified to have strong opinions with zero knowledge. Sound familiar? Someone reads one headline about economics. Now they're certain they understand inflation. Someone watches a documentary about history. Now they can explain why civilizations collapsed. Someone listens to a podcast about psychology. Now they can diagnose everyone they know. Here's how to spot this instantly. Ask someone about a complex topic. If they give you a confident, simple answer with zero caveats, they're operating from ignorance, because anyone who actually understands complexity knows that nothing worth understanding is simple. Certainty is the language of ignorance. Nuance is the language of understanding. But wait, before you start nodding and thinking about all the idiots you know, when's the last time you said, "I don't know about something you usually have an opinion on"? Here's a pattern you've definitely noticed. Someone has surface-level exposure to a topic. Now they speak about it with the confidence of someone who studied it for years. They don't realize that familiarity and expertise are completely different things. Schopenhauer called this the illusion of comprehension, mistaking recognition for understanding. You're at a party. Someone mentions they're into Stoicism. You ask what they've read. They say Marcus Aurelius. I have his quotes saved on my phone. They pull it out, scroll through. See? The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. That one changed my life. You ask them what Marcus Aurelius meant by the inner citadel. Blank stare. What's the difference between Stoicism and cynicism? Nothing. They have quotes. They don't have understanding. Here's the difference. Familiarity means you've been exposed to ideas. Expertise means you can work with those ideas, apply them, test them, see their limitations. Familiarity is passive. Expertise is active. And idiots can't tell the difference. Schopenhauer experienced this constantly. A colleague would approach him after a lecture. "I read your work on the will," they'd say. Schopenhauer would brighten. Finally, someone who engaged with his ideas. Then the colleague would say something that proved they completely misunderstood his entire premise. They were familiar with his work. They hadn't comprehended it. Social media made this 1,000 times worse. Everyone's familiar with everything. No one understands anything deeply. You've heard the terms, seen the debates, absorbed the talking points. And that familiarity creates an illusion. I know about this, but knowing about something is not knowing something. Here's the test. Could you teach this to someone else? Could you defend it against an expert's counter-arguments? Could you apply it in a situation you've never seen before? If no, you're familiar, not expert. And familiarity should make you curious, not confident. Stay with me, because this next part explains why some people can't see greatness even when it's standing right in front of them. To recognize that someone is better than you at something, you need to be somewhat competent yourself. If you're completely incompetent, you can't even perceive excellence. A child watches a chess grandmaster play. The grandmaster makes a move. The child sees a piece move from one square to another. That's it. The child can't see the strategy, can't see the trap being set 10 moves ahead. A person with no musical training can't distinguish a virtuoso from a competent player. They both just sound good. Schopenhauer called this the competence threshold for recognition. You need baseline competence to recognize superior competence, which means if you're truly incompetent, everyone looks roughly the same. The expert and the amateur, the genius and the mediocre. And this creates a devastating cycle. Because you can't recognize excellence, you don't know what to aspire to. You never improve because you can't see what improvement looks like. A student writes an essay, stays up all night working on it, reads it back and thinks, "This is good, really good." submits it with pride. The professor reads it. It's poorly structured, uses weak reasoning, makes claims without evidence. The student couldn't see any of this, because seeing those flaws requires skill they don't have. The gap between their self-assessment and reality is massive, but they can't perceive the gap. That's the whole problem. When idiots think they're smart, it's not delusion, it's blindness. But here's where it gets sneaky. Some idiots aren't confidently simple, they're confidently complex. They use big words, reference obscure concepts, construct elaborate theories, and because it sounds complicated, they assume they're being intelligent. Schopenhauer called this complexity as substitute for depth, the belief that if something is hard to understand, it must be profound. Corporate meeting. A consultant stands up. We need to leverage paradigmatic synergies to optimize our heuristic frameworks. Everyone nods. No one asks what it means. After the meeting, someone whispers, "What did he actually say?" The answer, "Nothing. We should work together better." That's it. Complexity can hide stupidity as effectively as it can express intelligence. Actually, it's often better camouflage. Schopenhauer was vicious about this. He'd read papers filled with technical terminology, elaborate sentences, references to obscure texts, and beneath all that complexity, often nothing, no actual insight. Marcus Aurelius cut through this. If you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it. But idiots invert this. If I can't explain it simply, it must be really sophisticated. No. It means you don't understand it well enough to simplify. Next time someone sounds brilliant, but you can't understand them, ask, "Can you explain that to me like I'm 12? If they can, they're actually smart. If they get defensive, you're watching camouflage. This next part will save you years of wasted arguments. You can't correct an idiot, not because they refuse to listen, but because they don't have the framework to process correction. Correction requires you to recognize that you were wrong, which requires you to perceive the gap between your belief and reality. But if you can't perceive that gap, you can't be corrected. Schopenhauer called this the closed loop of ignorance. Ignorance prevents you from seeing evidence. Not seeing evidence reinforces ignorance. Argument at a bar. Two friends. One says the earth is flat. The other pulls out his phone, shows NASA images. Fake. Shows physics explanations. Just theory. Shows ships disappearing over the horizon. Perspective. Every piece of evidence gets reinterpreted. After an hour, nothing has changed. The flat earth believer walks away thinking he won. Every tool you use fails. Not because the tools are bad, but because they don't have the equipment to receive correction. This is why Schopenhauer said, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves to be like other people." But idiots have forfeited the ability to change. You cannot argue someone out of a position they didn't argue themselves into. Here's the final piece, the one that seals everything in place. Idiots surround themselves with people who agree with them. Schopenhauer observed that mediocre minds naturally flock together because genuine intelligence makes them uncomfortable. Deep thinking feels like work. Questioning feels like threat. Group chat. Someone shares a political opinion. Everyone reacts with agreement emojis. Someone else quietly disagrees but says nothing, doesn't want the conflict. So the agreement stands. Reinforced, strengthened. Social media made this exponential. The algorithm shows you what you already agree with. Your feed becomes a mirror, and if you're operating from ignorance, you never see a single thing that challenges it. So here's what Schopenhauer would tell you about why idiots think they're smart. It's not arrogance, it's structural blindness. They don't know what they don't know. They mistake familiarity for expertise. They can't recognize superior skill. They use complexity as camouflage. They're immune to correction. They surround themselves with agreement. Each mechanism reinforces the others, creating an impenetrable fortress of confident ignorance. And here's what's brutal. They're not lying. They genuinely believe they're intelligent because from inside their fortress, they can't see outside it. Now here's the question that should keep you up at night. How do you know you're not one of them? Because every idiot believes they're intelligent, including you. When you're being an idiot about something, imagine yourself 10 years from now. You've learned more, grown more. You look back at something you believe today with absolute certainty, and you realize you were wrong, completely wrong. That future version of you is watching right now, wishing you'd listen. Schopenhauer's answer? Doubt. Intelligent people doubt themselves constantly, not paralyzing doubt, but productive doubt. The kind that asks, am I sure about this? What might I be missing? What evidence would change my mind? Idiots never ask these questions. Their certainty protects them from doubt. But intelligent people live in doubt, because doubt is the only antidote to comfortable ignorance. Here's my challenge. Pick one thing you're confident about, one belief you hold with certainty. Today, actively look for the strongest arguments against it, not to dismiss them, to genuinely test whether your confidence is justified. If you can't find good counter-arguments, you're not looking hard enough. And if you find them but can't engage honestly, you're being an idiot about this topic. And that's okay. We all are about something. The question is whether you have the humility to recognize it. If this made you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is your intelligence fighting against your ego's desire for certainty. Listen to it. The smartest people in history all had one thing in common. Not confidence, not certainty. They all doubted, constantly, relentlessly. Socrates doubted so much he became the wisest man in Athens by admitting he knew nothing. Newton doubted his own work for decades. Einstein spent his last years trying to prove himself wrong. Doubt isn't weakness. Doubt is the engine of intelligence. Drop a comment with one word: doubt. Not as weakness, as wisdom. Because Schopenhauer knew the wisest person is the one who knows how much they don't know. And the biggest idiot is the one who can't perceive the depths of their ignorance. Choose wisely.